I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Anjana Khatwa today. We're recording ahead of the day, but we're going out with this recording on the 6th of October, otherwise known as International Geodiversity Day. So, Anjana, welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me along, Helen. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you. And it's a delight to speak with you because I'm a big fan. I've been following your journey online for quite a long time now. And I just find that you're so inspiring about rocks and geology and that you make it engaging and accessible. And I really feel that those are in parallel with what Rockwatch tries to do in trying to get children and young people interested and enthusiastic about geology too. So I think there's some synergies there, which is why we really wanted to speak with you today. And what better way to celebrate geodiversity than a day like International Geodiversity Day, a day when countries from all around the world celebrate it and remind people that geodiversity plays such a critical role in tackling big challenges that we face on Earth today, like climate change and poverty. So, the timing of this year's theme, One Earth, Many Stories, couldn't be better than with the publication of your new book in mind. And we'll go on and talk about that with you in a few moments. But first, Anjana, can you tell us more about you and what you do, please?
Well, I'm like many rock watchers, actually. I started to love geology when I was a little girl, and I was really lucky to always love science because I went to the Science Museum when I was at primary school, and that's when my fascination with, well, particularly space started. I think I'd really wanted to be an astronaut, but that didn't quite work out, fortunately, for where I am now. But my parents are from Nairobi in East Africa, and when I was 13, I had a chance to go there and visit my family. And we were traveling from Nairobi to Mombasa and stopped by these amazing lava flows in southeastern Kenya. And I was 13, and I'm sure many rock watchers can relate to this, but it's when you see a rock that really speaks to you and you just completely captivated by how it looks, the colors, the textures, the forms. And for me, I really wanted to understand those stories. And I came away from that holiday not just with a rock, and here is my rock I picked up as a
Oh, wow.
13-year-old girl. I still have it. I'm 50 this year, by the way, rock watchers. So maybe I look it, I'm not sure. But I picked this rock up when I was 13 and I made a promise to myself I wanted to become a storyteller of rocks. And here I am with you today.
That's so wonderful. Thank you for telling that story. It's so inspiring for our younger people who genuinely want to become geologists, paleontologists, earth scientists, to hear a real life earth scientist say that they got to where their dream is and tell stories about rocks. So thank you so much. Now let's move on to your new book now. Can you sum up in one sentence, if possible, um, what for our young geologists, what does the Whispers of Rock mean?
Okay, well,
What's
I'm
it
going to
all
show
about?
you the book. Here it is, everybody. It's a beautiful book. That's the front cover, the side, and the back cover. Now, this is a book that I've written pretty much for grown-ups. So if you're over the age of 14 or 15, my daughter's just turning 14, and she can read it, and it kind of really speaks to her. But my book is essentially about how rocks have shaped our world and our lives. And it's a real global journey across the world, not just listening to the stories of rocks and what they can tell us about their own creation from a scientific perspective, but also listening to the stories of people and how they have related to the rocks all over the world.
Wow, that's a brilliant summary. Thank you so much. And I loved that if you're not particularly sciencey, you don't have a very academic background, that you've put a different layer on top about stories and arts and spirituality and geoheritage. It's just a different way of understanding all the rocks and the landscapes around us. And it was so accessible. It made it much so for our young rock watchers, it will mean that they will be able to understand it more, but you also introduce them to some science as well. I loved
Yeah,
it.
that was, sorry, Helen, that was really important for me because I think if you've got perhaps a parent or a carer who can perhaps read you a few few extracts from the book, what you'll find is that the science is really easily understandable. I'll explain what a limestone is in language that will kind of spark your imagination about these ancient worlds where these rocks are forming. And when we put those scientific stories alongside people who have told stories about rocks and landscapes for tens of thousands of years, suddenly for me, and I hope for you as a reader, those stories come alive. You can imagine, mountains being created by crashing continents. But also in North America, I uncovered this beautiful story from the Cherokee Nation about a buzzard that was searching for a home for his animal friends. And as he flew over the land, every time his wings beat down, they created a valley. And every time his wings beat upwards, the mountains rose up.
It's so poetic and beautiful, like so many stories in your book. Um, so you talk about lots of stories in your book, and this year's theme for International Geodiversity Day is One Earth, Many Stories. Which story in your book, and there are many, captures this idea best, do you think?
I think, yes, there are a lot to choose from, aren't there? And I think what's really important is that as geologists, as scientists, we have to accept that stories about our Earth have been told for tens of thousands of years, and we have to understand and respect that. And one of my favorite stories comes from Aotearoa in New Zealand, well, Aotearoa, New Zealand, and it's from Maori people who live on Te Waipounamu, which is the South Island. And for me, that was perhaps one of the most magical stories because we know that New Zealand sits on a plate tectonic margin. We have an oceanic plate that's being subducted beneath a continental plate, which is New Zealand itself. And that subduction, that kind of sinking of the oceanic plate into the mantle, causes the mountains to rise up. So that action causes mountains to be born, if you like. But what also happens during that process is that the deep crustal rocks that we see in the oceanic plate, they're kind of thrust up and kind of, I guess you would say, emplaced. So they're put upon the land itself. And these rocks tend to be really beautiful, vivid green in color.
Mm.
So we know the science behind why those rocks have ended up on the landscape. But when I was working with Maori tribes, they were telling me about their own creation story, this beautiful story of a water spirit known as Putini, who travels up and down Te Waipounamu, the western coast of the South Island, and he's the guardian for this greenstone, this rock. We geologists call it ophiolites, but in Maori they call it pounamu, and it's a really, really sacred rock. And the story goes as follows because Putini is this water spirit and he's traveling up and down the coast of Te Waipounamu. He sees a beautiful woman bathing in the river and he sees her and he really falls in love with her at first sight. And it's something that we can relate to because I think for me, I see a rock and I sometimes I really do fall in love with the rock at first sight. So anyway, Putini experienced this amazing wave of love for this woman, but she's married. And so he falls in love with her and he whisks her away into his arms and he begins to travel along the coast of Te Waipunamu. But her husband, Tamahua, comes back and he realizes his wife has been kidnapped in his eyes. And so he chases after the water spirit, Putini, and Putini travels all the way down the South Island of New Zealand. And every time he stops, he hides away, and Tamahua is searching for him and his wife. And eventually, Putini realizes that Tamahua will never stop searching for Waitiki, his wife. And so Putini, in desperation, he turns Waitiki, this beautiful woman he's kind of captured, he turns her into his own essence, into Pounamu, the greenstone, and he lays her down on this riverbed. And then Tamahua, who searches for her, realizes that she's gone. And Waitiki, who becomes the Punami, the greenstone in the riverbed, is now a very sacred representation of Putini on Earth. It's a sacred representation of Mother Earth and the power of nature in our world. And what I find remarkable is that as Putini was escaping and running away from the husband, that story has been told to Maori across generations. So actually, although it's a really incredible story about a water spirit who's fleeing a husband who's very angry with him, it also tells us the locations of where the greenstone can be found in the environment. And so when we as scientists are looking at indigenous stories or stories told about the world in different ways, sometimes they reveal all sorts of interesting knowledge that otherwise we wouldn't be aware of.
That's fascinating. And what a beautiful retelling of the story. And I loved in your book how you went on then to say that the Maori use the Maori stone in the beginning of their rugby games. Such a has such a sacred
Mm,
significance to the Maori people, and it goes on to shape their pride in their
mm,
heritage and inspires them to today and to be the best
mm.
versions of themselves today.
Yeah.
And as you say, this link with Mother Earth, it's sort of repeated across many nations, indigenous nations the world over, and it helps to us to understand the earth and the geology beyond the science
Mm,
and I think they seem to have, from your stories, I seem to take that they have a better relationship with the earth as a result of
mm.
having those stories.
I
That's
think so because the people that I've spoken to from all over the world, First Nations people in America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they have a very close relationship with rocks and landscapes because they can see how they're imbued with a spirit and a voice and a life. And I think for some of us, we pick up rocks like this, for example, and we see well, they're very solid and they sit in my hand and they exist. But for a lot of other people across the world, it's really important for rock watchers to understand that those people really see these rocks as beings that are alive, that have a right to exist just as much as we do as people.
absolutely well said. So if we could pick out one rock story which blew your mind when you were researching your book, what would it be?
Oh, that's such a difficult one, but I'm going to pick this one up because this actually features in my book, and it's a piece of Louisian gneiss from the Isle of Iona in Scotland that was sent to me by uh, Dr. John Faithful, who used to be the geological curator at the Hunterian Museum. Now, what I loved about this story is what's locked inside this rock. There's an incredible mineral. It's a superhero of all the minerals. It's called zircon. And zircon started forming when the Earth was born, if you like, 4.5 billion years ago. And when this gneiss was originally a granitoid, because that's how it began its life, it formed from magma that began to settle down and settle out and cool. And it cooled into these granitic rocks and locked inside the very early continents on Earth. There was a mineral called zircon. And what zircon did was it trapped uh, radioactive elements inside its core. And of course, some of rock watchers will know that radioactivity decays over time. Scientists know that, they can measure that. So, locked inside this rock is a mineral called zircon. That's like a time machine. It's captured that moment when the granite was formed. Now, much later on, the granites that eventually would become the gneiss in Scotland, the granites were transformed by heat and pressure to form this rock. And so, what I find incredible is that when I hold this rock in my hand, it's a story of immense time. This rock is estimated to be around 2.7 billion years old. Yeah,
Yeah,
and you can hold it in your hand today, and that is one of the most
yeah.
extraordinary stories.
I read this story and it made me have a sharp intake of breath. It's quite hard to put the feeling into words when you describe
Mm,
the deep history of our earth and that piece of rock.
mm.
It's held in your hand and that tells that story. Isn't it amazing?
It is amazing. It really is. And I think just to add for rock watchers that if you are visiting any kind of museums or Neolithic sites, it's not just scientists that have an awe kind of where we find these rocks so awesome. If you visit places like the British Museum, you'll see tools like hand axes and maces carved from rocks like this. And so what's really wonderful is rock watchers have a special superhero skill where they can go into museums, see nices like this, and you can appreciate the prehistoric history, but you also know about the deep geological history as well. And I think that's a wonderful superhero skill.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So stepping back for a moment and thinking about how geodiversity helps us to tackle some of the big challenges we now face on Earth, how can knowing these stories help us to reach a more sustainable future?
That's a great question, Helen, because I think scientists have to really step into a space where they understand and appreciate the value of rocks in our landscape. I don't disagree that we need rocks to sustain our life. We need minerals, we need rocks for construction, for example, to build housing for millions of people across the world. But I think where we need to be really aware of the sensitivities of quarrying and mining is the impact it has on the natural environment and also people that live within those spaces as well. And I think when we talk about One Earth, Many Stories, the stories include cultural perspectives on landscapes as well as scientific perspectives. So, for example, when we consider the impact that quarrying has on people and land and nature, it's just something to bear in mind that in our pursuit of minerals like cobalt or lithium or even limestone, which is the parent material that we need to make concrete, we have to be mindful that some of these landscapes people are very dependent upon them for clean water, for vegetation, for crops, for example. And we just have to really come into a space where we have to balance how much do we need these minerals? Can they be recycled from somewhere else? Can we do the quarrying or the mining in a more empathetic way to the natural environment that we care for it and we restore it back to what it once was, if it's possible? So that's what I think is perhaps a direction that we need to consider when we do look at geodiversity.
Absolutely, and using some of these minerals that we have to create more sustainable solutions, so that overall, yes, we're using some of the materials and minerals, but in a way that's going to be helping us do that more sympathetically to the world.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, because there are areas in the world where we see coal mines, and I'm sure many rock watchers can relate to this, that they might know that coal is a big fossil fuel contributor to climate change. So we have to ask ourselves a question, if we're going to dig a great big hole in the ground, should it be for coal or should it be for something else that's helping us towards a greener future?
Okay, so let's wrap up with a takeaway for rock watchers. Could you give them one practical thing they could do this week to help celebrate geodiversity?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think if a rock watcher could go to someone, maybe a friend or a parent or a carer, and just tell them a magical story that they love about rock, I think that would be a brilliant thing to do for International Geodiversity Day. And best of all, if you have a special rock, maybe you've picked it up on holiday, you went to a beach, or even there's something around you in the town where you live where you think, I really love that building and what it's made out of. I'm going to tell someone when they're walking past that building, just to take a look at the rock very carefully, that would be a brilliant thing to do to raise awareness of how these wonderful rocks around us tell their stories. But sometimes we just need to help people to listen to their stories.
Absolutely, that's such lovely advice, lovely advice, and I think anyone can tell a story to someone. So, like, a bit like Chinese whispers, let's do geology
Mm.
whispers. Let's tell stories to each other and keep that momentum going and that passion, and just be creative. Stay interested in the world and enjoy geology like you have all your life.
I know, and I think for rock watchers out there, you can be a rock watcher, but I think the next stage is to be a rock whisperer, where you spread your
Absolutely.
love and joy about what you love about the geological world to other people.
I love that. We'll end there. Thank you so much for your time, Anjana. I really wish you the best of luck with the rest of your book tour and your future geologizing.
Thank you very much. Bye, Helen.
Thank you. Bye bye.